Now, Robert Robinson is best remembered as the chairman of BBC Classics, Ask the Family and Brain of Britain. But in a career spanning many decades, he also made travel programmes, Points of View, the Today programme and Stop the Week. Laurie Taylor profiles the broadcasting legend, revealing a complex wordsmith and one of the first TV celebrities in this edition of Archive on 4 from 2011.
Archive on 4, presented by Laurie Taylor.
Hello. Yes, of course you remember. That was the signature tune for Radio 4's weekly conversation piece, Stop the Week, which ran for 18 years, from 1974 to 1992. I feel, and I'm sure that I sound like an imposter by daring to speak as those chords recede, for Stop the Week always belonged to its chairman, Robert Robinson, in much the way that, well, Mr. Toad was the sole proprietor of Toad Hall and Julius Caesar presided over all three parts of Gaul. No topic on the programme was ever discussed which didn't meet Bob's approval. No one dared to interrupt during his meticulously scripted introductions, and while a new guest might occasionally creep onto the programme without his enthusiastic support, they never again returned. Can't hit the ball back over the net was a frequent complaint about any new recruit who couldn't find any way of inserting an idea, a phrase, a word into the competitive babble set up by the regulars. Well, sadly, some of those regulars are now in a less competitive place, and I mourn the loss of such good friends as the composer Stephen Oliver, the psychiatrist and writer Anthony Clare, and the happy butt of so many of Robert Robinson's asides, Milton Schulman. Throw another log on the fire, Laurie, Bob would say, as Milton slowly cleared his throat and began an anecdote about the time he met Marilyn Monroe. But as you can probably hear from all that background noise, I'm happy to welcome 4 other regular Stop the Week guests to the studio to join me in this tribute to the dog chairman, Bob's own self-description there. Anne Leslie, the journalist, Sarah Harrison, the novelist, Matthew Paris, the journalist, and Nicholas Tucker, the academic. It's a bit funny when I'm introducing. I do seem to remember, Anne, that he had a little thing about you being the journalist, didn't he?
Yes, the trouble was he couldn't say a journalist who works for the Daily Mail, because he did regard the Daily Mail as certainly below the salt, which I used to think extremely cheeky, since he started as a star of the Daily Sketch.
Always described me as Professor of Sociology at the University of York, and I've always found this word Professor attached. I always felt a bit like Jimmy Edwards, as though I didn't really quite merit the term Professor. You were always a University of Sussex man, weren't you, Nicholas?
Very much so. My employers rather appreciated that at the time. And then I was always Nicholas, always on the programme. Immediately we got to the pub, I could then become Nick.
That's right.
I came relatively late to the programmes, and it was like joining a club where all the other people in the club had known each other for quite a long time, and Robert was the doyen of the club, and everybody knew the rules. I can't think why I was asked. Someone must have died. There can't be any other reason that I joined. But the immediate impression was of friendliness, openness, chumminess, and of Robert. I never really called him Bob. I didn't dare. Robert being the most genial of hosts. And then you suddenly realised that actually there were rules and there were things you didn't do, and you didn't interrupt Robert, and you would be gently but very notably put down.
Absolutely, yes. I remember I was the novelist. He had a way of putting the ist, as if it was something you sat at a sort of lathe and did,
Anyway, we've spoken a lot about Bob. It's probably it's time we heard him, isn't it, really? We've all got to stay very quiet now, because this is one of those opening monologues that we were talking about a moment ago. Here is Bob in full throttle on a familiar British custom.
Opening time, well, as far as we're concerned, we're open. We've declared ourselves open. Sometimes we start a little late, sometimes a little early. But our casual ways are by no means general, since opening time has the force of religious observance, and the idea of a bank or pub actually opening or closing its doors a minute before or after the mysteriously ordained time is to evoke the shattering of some primitive taboo. I've seen men of substance who would think nothing of speaking sharply to a traffic warden, queuing humbly outside either establishment, bank or pub, watching through the window as the manager with his starting pistol raised counts off the last few seconds on his chronometer, as though it would be impious if the bolts were to be drawn 1 parsec before they should be. So don't tell me they're going to liberalise pub hours. I'll believe that when I see it. The national veneration for opening and closing doors, according to ancient superstition, is much more likely to be extended than curtailed, so that shoe shops will only be allowed to sell Wellingtons between the hours of 20 to 11 and 3 every other Wednesday, leap years accepted. Now, you may say that's fanciful. I don't think you will.
Gosh, wasn't he wonderful? You see, we couldn't do this, à Canrigère d'Esprit.
I know, that was him back in November 1987, and there was always a moment after he stopped those opening monologues and you thought, you always shuffled your notes, didn't you, inside your head and
Your
thought...
paltry scribblings.
You thought the best has already gone.
When he did these monologues, it was very well crafted. I mean, he hated anybody who had crafted something because he'd say that smacks of, midnight oil or smells of midnight oil. But he spoke in semicolons, which was brilliant. And people like me were a little bit awestruck.
Yes, and he actually positively relished the words. I remember neither of these words are sort of very unusual in themselves, but it's where he put them together. I always remember contiguous integument, he said. And these words sounded like sweets and that sounded like licorice toffee. And you could tell the relish about this vocabulary,
Let's hear a little testimony to his way with words. This comes from Will Wyatt, who commissioned many of Bob's programmes, his travel programmes, and was also managing director of BBC Television.
I admired his use of language, and his determination to do it properly and use it properly. And I think it was a bit mannered sometimes. It was a bit contrived. It was occasionally, it could be, I found it very irritating. I remember I had several spats with him about language used on television. I don't mean bad language. I mean, he'd use words or phrases which I thought would not immediately be understood by the audience.
Such as?
I remember him referring once to the agenbite of inwit, which is Anglo-Saxon. And he said, if they don't know what that means, this is how they'll learn. This is how they discover it. And it's how we do understand what words mean. I'd never heard it before, but once you hear it, you kind of know what it's about. So he was very, one would have sort of arguments with him about that, because he was jolly well not going to temper what he said on the basis that there were idiots out there who wouldn't understand it. He was going to treat, I think one of his great qualities as a broadcaster, he was clearly a grown-up and he talked to the audience as if they were grown-ups. And it was mutual. You could like it or lump it, and he didn't much care if you didn't like it, but that's the way he was going to do it. I remember him telling the story of when he was on Brain of Britain, and the sort of people who go on to Brain of Britain are often a little bit pleased with themselves. Fair enough. They have every right to be, especially if they get near the final or into the final, and sort of asking how should they be described. One chap said, wordsmith, I think, to which Bob replied, I think not.
Agenbite of inward. Anybody?
I don't know. It's either existential angst or it's indigestion. That's good.
I'm able to tell you, because I looked it up before I came on the programme, that it refers to a prick of conscience. You see, there you are.
Yes,
you went
we'll remember that
You
now.
went very, very near.
Oh, inwit is a very good word for conscience.
Yes. Agenbite of inward.
It reminds me of a comment of Anne Leslie's that I think is actually in the dictionaries of quotations. She said to Robert while he was talking, "Oh, Robert, I love it when you talk like that. It reminds us of what we lost when they closed the grammar schools."
I do remember that. Because this thing of the grammar school, the bright boy who took elocution lessons, and I think Rains Park, which was the particular suburb he lived in, which was lower middle class and very aspirational, I think he was, I think, and this is a cliche which he would have slapped me down on, Rains Park ran through him like lettering through a rock.
Let's listen to someone now who remembers Bob at Rains Park. This is Paul Vaughan, the writer and broadcaster, and he was together with Bob. I think he was a couple of years ahead of Bob at Rains Park County Grammar School.
The headmaster, John Garrett, sort of imprinted his personality on the place, and his idea was to, it seemed very revolutionary at the time, but it doesn't anymore, his idea was to open boys' eyes to things their parents never really took much notice of, such as the theatre, music, books, good books, the cinema as an art form, and so on, and good pictures, paintings. We had modern reproductions of modern paintings on the wall.
So, apart from the fact the headmaster knew Auden, he also invited people like Auden, didn't he, to come and speak to the boys?
We had a sort of march past of all the famous intellectuals of the period. Cecil Day Lewis was there every year. He would come and sing. He would recite poems. I remember he recited to us, or read to us some of his translations of the Georgics of Virgil. And
Michael Redgrave?
Michael Redgrave came. He also sang. He was in the Beggar's Opera with the Lyric Hammersmith at the time.
You had Sybil Thorndike, I think, popped along.
We had Sybil Thorndike, that's true. She came and acted scenes from Shakespeare. She was doing all the parts.
You were lower middle class.
Yes.
How did lower middle class boys react to this Oxford man trying to open their eyes to the Olympian heights of literature and art and music?
Bear in mind, by the way, before we go any further, that John Garrett himself was lower middle class. His father was a barber in Bristol, and there was a lot of snobbery in his family. And there was a lot of snobbery in my family and most of the other families in Rains Park, I think. And Garrett wanted our school to be like a public school. He tried to. We had the same sort of institutions. We had prefects. We had prefects' court, and we played rugger, not soccer.
So there was some extent to which you were in a way aping your betters.
Yes,
you were playing at being better than you were.
Yeah, we were. Yeah,
pretentious.
And changing our voices too.
Changing voices?
Yes,
Tell me.
we all spoke with sort of slightly Cockney accents.
Of course, Bob was from Liverpool.
Was he?
Yes, no, Bob was from Liverpool. Yes, he came down from Liverpool.
I didn't know that.
But changing voices, his voice?
I think he changed his voice. I mean, it didn't sound like a Liverpudlian when we knew him.
But you were aware of changing your voice, were you?
Oh, yes, very much so.
Were there elocution lessons?
There was a geography master who spoke absolutely impeccable English. He was a proper toff. And his name was Gibb, very nice man, charming man. And he used to, he taught English grammar, and he conceived the idea that this should also include how to speak English properly. So he would make us all say, "How now, brown cow?"
You and Bob both go up to Oxford
Yes.
from there. I mean,
Yes.
quite something for a lower middle class suburban boy.
yeah.
And what do you remember of him at Oxford?
Well, he was editor of the ISIS when I was there, and I worked on the ISIS. I was editor of the films page.
Tell me a little about his writing, though, because that's quite an elevated position, editor of ISIS. Do you remember anything about his style, his literary preoccupation?
It was rather like his speaking style. It was, I think the word is Mandarin, it was rather a little bit, I have to say, precious. A lot of abstract words would have been trundled out, and it's like the sort of Shakespearean idioms, but soft, and he had also, by this time, a rather fruity voice, concealing, I suppose, this Liverpudlian origin.
And acting as well. He appeared on the stage.
Yes, he did. He was quite a good, well-known member of Ouds, and he was very good.
Tell me, when you watched Bob's later career, radio, television and writing, were you still seeing the lower middle class Rains Park County schoolboy?
No, not at all, no. Our masks by then were all complete.
Had he reinvented himself? Was he?
Yes. I think we all had.
I remember once he was terribly shocked because I don't know how it came up, one never did, but I said on the programme that I always planted plastic lilies in my garden because they look exactly like the real thing. Unlike the real thing, they don't rot, they're not eaten by slugs, and nobody could tell the difference. He actually was upset by that.
Yes.
He would then, when you went to his house, he always pointed out his the paintings he bought, because he was very fond of those, the craquelure, which was proof that these, craquelure is the sort of slight little bits of cracks in a painting. I mean, Vermeer is full of craquelure, which showed that it was original, which of course it wasn't, because you can now fake that. But he was always very keen that you knew when he did something, it was authentic, upper middle class, and not like me, who was actually upper middle class, who would quite happily plant plastic lilies in my garden.
And I think it wasn't quite as simple as being embarrassed by his origins. In some ways, I think he was a little bit proud of them. I come from the same lower middle class origins, but at one generation removed. And I recognise in Robert, at the same time as having a slightly exaggerated respect sometimes for the upper classes and duchesses and all the rest, also a slightly chippy, I made it on my own, whereas you didn't.
Yes, absolutely, because in his book, it's a great, paean of praise to the suburbs. I think the first page, he lists all the different house names, not with derision, but with enormous affection.
Yes.
But I think this is a sort of divided bit of Bob. He both celebrated what he was and also opposed it all the time. So you never quite knew which track you were going to be on.
Yes, and I remember one little thing where somebody used the phrase rat race in the programme, and he came down like a ton of bricks. I wish you wouldn't use that horrid phrase about people's honest day's work.
One of the words that some listeners and some hostile critics used to use when describing Bob and the programme was pretentious. So, the idea was that Bob was putting on airs. The sense that Bob was trying to live a life above his station was certainly felt by a journalist who was his second-in-command in the early days when Bob was the editor of that very famous Atticus column on the Sunday Times. And that's the biographer of the Beatles, Hunter Davis.
The other thing I remember about him was his passion for Dr. Johnson. And he styled himself in his speech on Dr. Johnson. He was always quoting from Dr. Johnson. And he was always very fluent, witty, literary person. And he spoke in a stylised way, calling people sir and madam, and I beg your pardon, and I beg your leave, and not prithee, but that sort of thing.
Would that it were.
Would that it were. He once invited my wife and I to a dinner party in Cheney Row.
In Chelsea, his beloved Chelsea.
The most amazing house he got, which I've been to a few times over the years, was it was like a stately home. And when I first went there in the early 60s, I thought it was amazing. It was sort of lovely carpets and lovely antique furniture and lovely napery and crockery. And I have a memory of when we went for a dinner party, was he had a uniform made. Can I have made that up? Serving it. But what was funny was, I thought that was the height of chic and posh. But as the 60s went on, Bob's style didn't change. And we living in this house were stripping the floors and having pine. And Conran came in. And Bob missed all that. And he stuck in his groove of what he thought as a young man, what a man of letters is, how his house should be.
I heard a story that when you went round to Bob's, in those days, because you were telling about going round to Cheney Walk, that after dinner, that the women were expected to...
Exactly. They went into one room and the men went for port and smoking. He was living in a time warp, in a way. He was a 30s literary gentleman. He should have been... I once interviewed J.B. Priestley, and he lived like that. But he was centuries before us.
I wonder how you react to some of those stories there. I mean, but I was just read descriptions by Hunter of going round to the house, and Bob almost inventing himself.
I didn't even know he had Rains Park origins, because he sounded, as others have said, like a literary gent of a previous era. But almost like, scratching a scab. He would always tell me, of course, I was not a son of the Raj like you. This would be in the pub, incidentally, not on air. I came from Rains Park, and it was a duality in him.
But he sort of liked to peddle this thing about the son of the leafy suburbs. The leafy suburbs were the phrase he used a lot.
Self-confessed, Matthew, you were lower middle class. When you hear, say, the Hunter Davis stories of, the hired maid and of all of this and the ancient heavy furniture, and so, I mean, this is just somebody perhaps choosing what they like rather than attempting to be something that they aren't.
To a degree. The lower middle class bit of my family is not my parents, but my grandparents. Grandpa was a butcher in Penge. And as he made money, he joined the Rotary Club and he joined the Freemasons and he joined the local golf club, and it was partly because he liked golf and Rotary dinners, but partly because it was, and he started voting Conservative. It was just a sign of moving up. And many things about Robert remind me a little of Sir John Major, also an extremely erudite man. I never doubted the northern origins. They were always very clear to me, and it wasn't the accent, it was just the way he talked and the occasional put down. I remember it perhaps for the first or second time I joined you all on the programme. He asked me a question. I said, I think I'm pretty strong on this subject. And there was a pause, and he said, "We'll be the judge of that." That was a very Lancashire, Liverpool way of talking. It's not Southern.
It's very interesting you should say that, because I remember when Major took over the Tories, and Bob was very sort of keen on him. I think that fellow is going to be all right.
Let's shift away from this class issue a bit, because the other thing about Bob was that in many cases he was... It's a terrible phrase. I'm plucking it from a columnist in the Yorkshire Evening Press. He was very much a man of the people, because often when we used to go to the pub with him afterwards in the George, it was quite surprising. We'd find ourselves all standing in a little group together, and he'd have disappeared because he'd struck up a conversation at the bar with a man who he'd never met before, asking the man about why he chose to put some lemonade in his pint of lager. And it was a sociability. I mean, I think you remember that. I mean,
Don't you think that was partly that he believed that aristocrats are always very nice to the lower orders?
You could take them anywhere.
I just want to play you a couple of examples. I really want to play this because I just find it so hilarious. But let me think of an intellectual. Yes, the intellectual reason for it is to show that there were certain places where Bob was not at home, where he really couldn't quite manage. And this is when he went out interviewing a lot of the stars, and here he is. This is really somebody from a different realm of being. It's Bob being bouleversed by Jane Mansfield.
Miss Mansfield, I know you won't think I'm rude if I say that a visit to you is rather like a visit to the Tower of London. You're both institutions. And I wonder what it feels like to belong to the public.
My goodness, I guess I feel the same way as the Tower of London feels.
Do you find it at all disagreeable to find yourself, and quite often your family, on more or less constant view?
Actually, I feel that a star owes it to her public to bring the public into her life.
I know that publicity in general doesn't frighten you, Miss Mansfield, because hardly a day goes by but you aren't cooperating with the publicists. But I wonder how much this publicity overshadows your actual acting.
I don't think it has anything to do with acting, because I'm certainly not acting.
I mean the time spent. I mean, you're in front of the public perhaps as often in pictures in newspapers as you are in films.
I tell you, Robert, there are two important things in the life of an actress. The most important is to be a good actress, to be a very fine star. That is tremendously important. The other important thing is to be known, because if you're a Bernhardt or a Shakespeare, if no one knows about it, then you may as well just kind of act in your own home, which doesn't do too much good if you want to be a successful star. So I feel that the right balance of acting, the right balance of publicity, coupled with talent, brings forth a giant star that cannot be toppled over.
Have you ever refused to do a publicity stunt? I mean, is there a kind of publicity you try and avoid?
I've never done a publicity stunt in my entire life, and I never will.
What about the Chiswick flyover? Now, in my opinion, that was a stunt.
It wasn't in mine, and it wasn't in the opinion of the people who asked me. They built a very beautiful freeway, or flyover, as it's called over here. And I was quite honored to have been asked to open this because it was a great sign of progress.
But do you think you were an apt choice? I mean, I imagine you know very little about flyovers. You're a terribly well-known person, but you aren't actually associated with flyovers.
Is anyone?
I suppose not. Perhaps outside of a borough surveyor. I hear you've got fountains in your living room and very large dining table with a marble top capable of seating 40 people, and fur on the walls in the bathroom. Now, apart from the fur on the walls in the bathroom...
Which bathroom? 13.
I see. Are they all got fur on?
Only one.
Oh, only one. Well, leaving aside the fur on the bathroom walls, the rest of it sounds splendid, but it doesn't sound very cosy to me.
It doesn't sound cozy? Well, I can't picture anything more cozy than a fireplace, and every room actually has a fireplace, and it's just like sort of living in a wonderful a powder box with everything very, very highly carpeted. It couldn't be cozier. It's like a bug in a great big rug. I love living there, I really do. And I feel that no matter where you are, no matter how grandiloquent your home is or how poor your home is, if you're there with your husband and your family and those you love, that makes it cozy. Not how much money you have or what you put into it.
Thank you very much, Miss Mansfield.
Thank you.
What about that interview? I think she won, didn't she?
I think she did win,
And
yes.
also, I think it was one of those things where he may, to be fair, we're sort of saying, oh, Bobby is right out of his... He wasn't. It was all terribly knowing on his part, surely. But actually, you know, she, just by being herself, you're right, she came out of that unscathed.
But I think she was sharper than just...
Yes.
she was much sharper than he was expecting.
Let's hear him with somebody he admires. This is Noel Coward.
You're a very variously endowed person, Mr. Coward. I wonder how you apportion the satisfactions of writing, acting, and composing. In short, which of them gives you the most satisfaction?
Well, it's awfully difficult to say, because I enjoy doing what I'm doing. But one of the problems of my life is to make the time for each without sacrificing one to the other.
I'm not inviting you to be modest when I ask you this, but I wonder if you have any idea which you're best at.
No, I don't know. I try to be my best at all of them, but it doesn't always work, but sometimes it does.
You're not only a real person, actually composed of flesh and blood, but you're a legend as well. Is it tiresome to be a legend?
No, I haven't found it so. I didn't know that I was all that much, but I suppose I am. No, I don't think it's very tiresome. I rather enjoy it.
And I wonder if you get tired of admiration. You are admired, and I think justly, for your ability in all these various fields. Do you ever get tired of being admired?
Well, I've yet to meet an artist of any sort who gets tired of being admired.
We've had Jane Mansfield, we've had Noel Coward. But now here he is, Bob, talking to Shirley Ann Field. Shirley Ann Field might not have been the Sybil Thorndike de nos jours, but she certainly deserved, I always think, a little better than this.
Now we come to Miss Shirley Ann Field. Now, once upon a time, she used to be the darling of the photographers. You could see her, an anonymous figure, any Sunday morning in the newspapers, and dipping her toe in the briny or disporting herself in the snow. The activity, though not the costume, changing with the season. And now Miss Field is an actress. After appearing in very brief parts in unmemorable films, she's been given the leading feminine role in a film called Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, made by the same thoughtful filmmakers who made Look Back in Anger and The Entertainer. I'd like you to meet her. Miss Field, good evening.
Good evening.
Well, would you claim, I know it's a loaded term, would you claim to be an intellectual yourself?
No, I would claim to be a thinker. I haven't got the education to be an intellectual, but I'd like to be.
Are you trying? I mean, what are you doing? Do you read a lot?
Oh, yes, I read all the bestsellers that come out.
Nothing very intellectual about most of the bestsellers, though, is there?
Pity, isn't it? But anyway, you know, I'm trying to acquire as much knowledge as possible because I think that without brains, you know, life isn't worth living. It's a third dimension to living, you know.
Are you very critical of your own acting? Or do you always enjoy seeing yourself?
I hate myself. I haven't done anything yet that I've liked. I mean, I hate corny actresses. Now, I've just had a love scene in Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, and I felt very sincere about this scene. And when I saw the rushes, I found I was using every corny thing. I was trembling my mouth and all the sort of things that I think are horrible.
How do you mean, trembling your mouth?
Well, I obviously do it when I'm emotional, but I didn't realise this. My mouth was trembling in close-up, which I think is the corniest thing that can happen. I mean, this isn't acting. This is just sort of, you know, just a sort of gesture of the old Hollywood films, you know, when you used to get the blonde beauty who said, 1, 2, 3, cry. I hate that sort of actress.
Well, at least you recognise your defects, and if you recognise them, you may be able to counter them. Miss Field, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Sarah, I was watching the expression on your face during
that. That was both cruel and rude, I thought. He sort of let himself down, particularly after, when you could hear in the Noel Coward one, he actually copied Coward's vocal mannerism at one
But
point.
don't you
It's
think
hard-
there's a
and
gender
there's-
thing here?
Yes.
The trouble is with dear Shirley Ann is she was just a woman. And there was a gender problem with him, and that's actually to do with his generation, because he didn't regard women as serious human beings. He shared that with Robin Day, who was a mate of his. And I do remember this wonderful remark he made in the pub, that trouble is, no woman can do stop the rot, which is what he called it. They can't do on-air conversation. So I was standing there and I said, Bob, excuse me, but you may not have noticed. I'm a woman. I've been doing Stop the Week for years. And he turned to me dismissively and he said, oh, I never think of you as a woman. And I just said, that is not the big compliment you
Nicholas,
think
I mean,
it is.
one thing we haven't said, we've gone on about Bob. I mean, he was a wonderful talker, and it's interesting when we play in these little clips of him that all of you around the table start laughing all over again, even though you've heard them before. But it needs to be said that he was a good listener. If you could capture his attention, I mean, he always used to deny there was such a thing as a good listener. I remember him once saying there was no such thing as a good listener, just someone waiting for their turn to talk. And of course, on Stop the Week, you had to be a good listener. I mean, particularly when Milton Shulman was part of the company.
But to me, the most beautiful illustration of this was in a Jewish theatre in the Bronx, where they had a tradition in this Yiddish theatre where not only would people heckle, but the actors would reply, you see, and it's, of course, traditionally actors never reply. But in this case, Mr. Goldberg is dying, fatal disease. Mrs. Goldberg is on her knees, talking to the doctor and saying, Doctor, doctor, please, can't you do something to save my husband? And the doctor is saying, I'm afraid, Mrs. Goldberg, he's beyond the powers of myself. His fate is now in the powers of a greater source than me. And a voice in the back said, why don't you give him an enema? To which the doctor goes to the front of the stage and says, it wouldn't help. And the voice from the back says, it wouldn't hurt.
That's very disrespectful. It's the best story you've ever told, my friend. That's excellent.
There is Bob really relishing it, and the relationship with Milton was a very lovely one to observe. I mean, those of us who said, because I mean, they were old friends, but they were entirely different sorts of people. I mean, their background, Milton, sort of Canadian, Jewish, and all his exploits around the world. But they had a really very loving relationship.
Yes, we all did actually about Milton, because we would, when he would go on to one of these quite lengthy, I have to say, Goldberg jokes, which we knew off by heart, we'd start reciting them under our breath, and then after a while Bob would say, get on with it.
Or throw another log on the fire.
But, you know, they were very fond of each other.
I want to know, I mean, here we're talking about this mild clash of cultures here, but I want to talk a little tiny bit about Bob's Englishness. I mean, you've actually brought up the idea of John Major, I mean, the impossibility of John Major being anything other than English somehow. But Bob's Englishness, and sometimes almost, he might have been accused sometimes of almost being too English, so seeing events entirely from the point of view of the Englishman with a furled umbrella. But here he is. This little extract is from, yes, it's New Year's Day, 1973, and this is during his 3-year stint on the Today programme. It's interesting to listen to now compared to the Today programme at the moment, but this is, of course, this is when the day when Britain's brand new membership of the European Union.
Well, what had for so long been promised or threatened, according to which way you look at it, had come to pass, and people looked out of their windows to see if anything had actually happened. Would the British streets be full of Frenchmen forcing butter at 30 bob a pound on innocent passers-by? Germans with 2-acre faces and twice the normal allotment of teeth, pressing 8-foot sausage rings through the letterboxes of Angles and Saxons who only bangers know. But no, not really. Not a dachshund barked. The outside world bore little evidence of the continental Sunday, and bacon and eggs, not Dutch cheese, as I'm sure Douglas will vouch, is going to be served for breakfast as usual in Britain. As the American magazine Newsweek laconically put it, the British were sleepwalking into the common market. A bit of a letdown, if truth be told. You can't help feeling the occasion might have been marked with some sort of public ceremony, free issue of small black berets, say, or a dinner of Spargel and petersillian kartoffel with the diplomat of your choice. But no, it seems that going into the common market was little more than a state of mind. No doubt such stigmata as membership may lay upon us all will in time be observed in the price tickets in our supermarkets, up or down, according to the new European economics. But meanwhile, going in means simply staying where we are. And that's really why the Today bunch decided to do the thing literally, to walk into the cities of the community with that proprietorial air we can never muster on holidays, to see what Europe's like from the point of view of a shareholder. So I'm in Paris today, tomorrow John Timpson reports from Hamburg, and so on through Europe and the week. So far, I can testify the early mornings are a little later, a little darker in Paris, faintly more aromatic, an immemorial compound of lavatories, stockpots and tobacco.
It's time we had more dialogue with nations and learnt what all our foreign neighbours do. The British should be fostering good relations to see ourselves as other nations do.
The French have unfortunate plumbing, the cause of the plague and Black Death. Their manners are quite unbecoming, and garlic fumes hang on their breath. All Frenchmen have livers that finally fail to cope with wine drunk on a gigantic scale. To wash down the uncooked lamb, garlic and snail, they go to the dogs eating mussels and frogs. But let's not be bigoted, biased or blind. They're foreign, so try to be kind.
It's time we tried to foster good relations with foreigners in every shape and hue, to help the foreign peoples of all nations to learn to be, like me and you.
Instant Sunshine, and they were really, in a way, the musical stalwarts of the programme. We always had a little interval in the middle, and I think Dilly Keane and Fascinating Aida were there. But we were talking about Bob's Englishness, and I think probably it was his capacity to be the interested but occasionally bemused Englishman abroad which made his travel programmes so distinctive. Knowing exactly where he came from allowed him to appreciate perhaps the full difference of others. Here he is, fresh from a besooted ride on an elephant in India.
Coming down those steep mountains from Simla and finding myself back in India again was like emerging from an archaeological dig. It was a little startling to find there actually was somewhere called the present. I noticed again what I'd noticed before, the way people look at each other. They look at each other without challenge. One man's face turns towards another man's face, and there is no vestige of accusation in either. In India, everyone stares, but it's never a stare that's trying to catch you out.
I think it was his genial loftiness which enabled him to produce some wonderfully telling characterizations of alien cultures. No one has ever written as well as this about American cuisine, and it was in a TV travel documentary, for goodness sake.
You never know, it might be the effect of their pioneer history, all that rancid belly of pork, which frightened them off food and made them think that anything you could actually taste must have something wrong with it. Sometimes the only way of identifying the food in America is by eye rather than palate. It has to be food-shaped. Where has all the flavour gone? One theory is that it's been siphoned out of the cuisine and put on the menu. There, your hamburger is a king burger, a bulgy burger, a huge burger, not cooked, but smoked oh so slowly over crackling hickory logs, prior to nestling within, being cuddled between, or indeed graciously amassed upon, two super soft bake-oven baps, and served knee-deep in sweet mustard sauce. That's why when it arrives, piping hot from your genial host's charcoal hearth, it tastes of nothing. Drowned in rhetoric, the flavour dies. The national dish of America is menus.
Well, I think that was a little line which made its way into all the dictionaries of quotations, and the national dish of America is the menu. Bob abroad, Nicholas.
Well, this isn't quite Bob abroad, but you may remember we didn't get very much fan mail for Stop the Week. I can't think why. but one week we got a missive from Hong Kong, and it was from a telecommunication engineer, and he said, "I make a point of listening to your programme every week." Then Bob went on, "After I've heard it, that reconciles me to being out in Hong Kong."
But I thought those two clips from the travel programmes were absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
Really
Yes,
thoughtful, really good, beautifully expressed, but also very carefully observed. That business about in India, people looking at each other but
Yes.
without comment or question.
One thing, of course, that we've alluded to, but we haven't quite properly recognised, is how famous Bob was during those television years. I mean, for 30 years, while Call My Bluff was on, while Ask the Family was on, while Points of View was on, those programmes were going out, I mean, he was probably almost one of the 2 or 3 best-known faces in the whole of the country. He was famous. He was a celebrity. But, of course, for doing what exactly was a question to which he was always returning. Why was he so well-known? Why was he famous? And nowhere did he ask that question with quite such persistence. I don't know how many of you saw it, but I thought it was quite a remarkable television programme called The Magic Rectangle. And you want the thesis of that? Well, here you are.
Once upon a time, if you wanted the attention of an audience, you wouldn't expect to get it unless you could do something the audience thought it couldn't do for itself. You'd have to be able to juggle or sing a song. It really wouldn't be any good just turning up and being there. But this was before the magic rectangle, a geometric figure which has only to be placed round the head and shoulders, and suddenly everyone is looking at you. Without any obvious talent for doing anything in particular, you can become the person everyone sees. The audience doesn't so much applaud as take you into public ownership, letting you go on doing what doesn't look like very much, almost as though they were doing it themselves. They stare easily into your face, as though recognising features that belong to them, as though your identity were a vacant space in which they find their own. Does this mean that the little rectangle, in turning a real person into a television personality, deprives him of something? In turning him into a version of everyone, has it turned him into no one? Everyone and no one. A new fate for Narcissus.
And during the course of the programme, Bob, of course, went round and met a whole range of celebrities and asked them exactly whether or not they thought there was something special about themselves which had turned them into a celebrity, and many of them demurred at that. But Bob's old friend, Robin Day, he refused to play the game.
There are some people who tend to be well known in whatever community they're in, whether it's school or university or the army, and later on in their adult life. And I've always been conscious of being fairly well known.
Of course, a lot of people try hard to get attention, but it does seem to me that some people seem to have this ingredient, which without their really trying very hard, attracts attention.
Well, I don't know. You see, this is all too psychological for me. I mean, I never thought about this kind of thing. I mean, I went into television because I hadn't got a job, and somebody said, "Why don't you go on for television?" I said, "What's television?" And I went to apply, and I was given a job. I thought I wasn't going to keep it for very long. I don't know whether I had it because I liked attracting attention or not. I mean, I don't spend my time in pointless psychological introspection.
But it was you who proposed that you were famous through life long before television.
I didn't. You asked me a question, and I didn't say I was famous all through life. I said I was well known in whatever community I happened to belong to.
Yeah, that's what I call a euphemism, but I don't know. That's a 3-syllable word.
That's what I actually said, whatever you call it.
Let me get back to my list of questions. Yes.
Have you got a list of questions?
I have indeed a list of questions.
You don't mean to say these have been prepared?
Kindly leave the stage while I utter one.
Now, the central thesis, you can see, is right at the heart of Bob's concern about why is he so well known when what he's been doing is so, as he seemed to think on many occasions, so lacking in worthwhileness.
Yes. That's the poignancy. I mean, as we've heard on all your other recordings, Bob was so good at what he did, and yet he was famous for things that probably anybody could have done. And I think he was full of worry about the ephemerality of his best contributions and the endurance of the things he'd rather forget.
We talked earlier on about Samuel Johnson, and there are parallels with Samuel Johnson, who also was extraordinarily famous, not least for just being Dr. Johnson, and always hankered after something that would be more enduring. And I bet that Robert understood that.
Yes, he was being very abusive about my then editor, David English, editor of the Daily Mail. And
I remember what he said. Do you remember what he actually said?
I do.
He said, couldn't he get a decent job stealing cats for vivisection?
Yes. Now, naturally, as I was extremely fond of David English, and indeed of Bob, I said, well, we can't all be quizmasters. Now, it was a terrible put down. But do you know, every time, or more or less every time, Bob was interviewed, he would cite this. And I used to wonder, is he just being kind to me? Or is it because there is, underneath that acknowledgement of the remark, it was, of course, a put down, lay somewhere that he felt he had not achieved what he wanted to, because he was most famous for being a quizmaster.
And it's your turn again. A Rider Haggard hero, whose name was the title of one of Haggard's novels, was known in Zulu as Macumazan, he who gets up in the middle of the night. It seemed very odd. Or he who keeps his eyes open, which is, I think, more to the point. What was his English name?
You said the title of a novel, didn't you?
No, I said, what was his name?
Yes, but it was the title of a novel as well.
Well, I learn something new every day, Mr. Chivers.
Alan Quatermain.
Quite right, Alan Quatermain. But he was the narrator, not the title of the novel, of King Solomon's Mines.
Yes, but he did write a book afterwards called Alan Quatermain.
I ran on my sword there, Mr. Chivers. And I couldn't do it to a better man, thank you.
He never lost sight of the fact that the quiz was a game. It was meant to be fun, and when he was there, it was fun, and that's why people liked to listen to it. But he was very kind with the contestants, you know. If somebody got an answer wrong, whereas some quizmasters would say, no, that's not it, or a certain quizmaster who shall be nameless would say to a university student, Calcutta, you're not even in the same continent. You know, Bob would say, well, it's not the right answer, but it certainly ought to be. And that's a wonderful thing to say. So you felt that it was the question setter who got it wrong, not you.
Geoffrey Wheeler, who worked for a time with Bob on Call My Bluff. And, of course, Bob had catchphrases that would that it were and fiddle-dee-dee. It's quite silly, isn't it, to think of this man being the manufacturer of catchphrases. And impersonators quickly caught on to them. Here are just a few having a go at Bob.
Good evening. I am Robert Robinson. My name is Robert Robinson. We are the Robert Robinsons. This is our hour. That much is certain. Though tish, nay, hush, and fourpence. And an extra point for being so clever. Would that it were, would that it were. Indeed, would that it were, Mr. Charteris, would that it were.
Hello. Welcome to Number Wang with me, Robert Robinson, and the world's first commercial Number Wang solving computer, Colosson.
I am Colosson.
Indeed you are. Round one, Miss Julie to play first.
7.
Could it be Number Wang? Colosson?
No.
Would that it were Number Wang? Alas, it is not.
Yes, indeed. Pish, tush, and fiddle me ree. And welcome to Brain of Britain. And it's very exciting here at the moment. Now, you may remember that at the end of yesterday's programme, Mrs. Julia Phillips had amassed an incredible, wait for it, book token. Well, now she's going to try to turn that book token into a book token and a round of applause. Blether, blether, guff, guff, ah.
Brian Laurie, Robert Webb and John Culshaw. Now, I must say that I know how much we've been smiling at what Bob had to say. It suddenly just came back to me. Isn't it funny, sitting here when you start to think, I recall how often on the programme I was sitting and smiling at what he had to say and trying to restrain your laughter. I can remember once when he was talking about... he just said, a word of advice is said about never going to the theatre on Boxing Day, because he said on Boxing Day, he said all the people who go there, he said all the men there have received aftershave for their Christmas gifts. And he said it's like sitting there for 2 hours having little twigs shoved up your nose. I thought it was a perfect capture. Shall we have a little bit, because we're coming to the end now, and this tribute to Bob. Are there any other things that we've perhaps missed out, good things that we've forgotten to say about him, sort of happy memories that we might want to sort of, when we left here, we suddenly feel if they would come back to us, oh, I should have said that. Nicholas, is there anything else that you recall from all your meetings with Bob and the way he was?
He was a great consumer of the popular culture of his own childhood, and he used to speak beautifully about minor actors in Hollywood. And we all went to see a play at the Mermaid Theatre about Laurel and Hardy. And afterwards, Bob said, aren't those early films of Laurel and Hardy lovely? Because Hollywood had hardly been built then. So everything, rather like the suburbs, everything was gleaming and new. And he spoke about it with such affection that I've always remembered to look out for those signs afterwards.
Yes, he rather loved showbiz, and I think that I found that very touching. He liked that. I remember talking once about, we were talking about horror musicals, we were talking about Ginger Rogers and his great passion for Ginger Rogers and the whole staircase thing, and also his great charm, his sort of sweetness, possibly connected with what you said about him being a romantic. I remember once I was very scared of him. I remember us hovering outside the lift, going down to go down to the basement studio where and suddenly Bob came around the corner, you know, the hat, the scarf, and I thought, oh my God, I've got to go down the lift. We're going to have to talk. I don't know what I'm going to say. I immediately, my throat closed like a Venus flytrap. And he sort of held out his hand and said, there you are, my dear. As if the very person he'd been looking for, and my world lit up. What a darling.
He was very kind to me. I was very much a new boy on the block with Stop the Week, and quite nervous, and at the same time rather bumptious, and rather younger than some of the others. And he could have put me down very easily, and he only ever hinted at criticism. But what this discussion has surprisingly shown me is that a man I always thought of as rather an old-fashioned character, in some ways a throwback to another age. In one sense he was, but in other ways he was a very modern figure. He had a very prescient sense of where the media was going and where broadcasting was going. He was an early celebrity.
You brought me into my last question, really. But could he do it now? Haven't we all become so determinedly classless, so matey, so lacking in formality? Aren't those all now requirements? Even on Radio 4, we constantly hear about the need for people to embrace their audience, get a little bit closer. What Bob never did was got a little bit closer.
No, I don't think that style is completely dead. I mean, I think that actually the idea that a Bob Robinson couldn't make it these days, if he sorted out his hair. I mean, we have a national treasure like Stephen Fry, who, like Bob, speaks in entire sentences.
Bob would never have wanted to be a national treasure.
No. I mean, on the other hand, he really did like being a national treasure.
Sure.
Absolutely. I mean, he would hate the cliche.
Yes, you need to be able to have it there in order to shrug it off.
Anne Leslie, Sarah Harrison, Nicholas Tucker and Matthew Paris were taking part in Archive on 4, a tribute to Robert Robinson. The presenter was Laurie Taylor and the producer in Manchester was Helen Lee. Archive on 4, a tribute to Robert Robinson from 2011.